A key thing when you're looking at analogies is to try to determine the relationship between the word pairs. So here we have wood and fire. A great way to establish a relationship is to create a sentence, a short sentence that's going to explain how the two relate to each other. And so you might say, wood feeds a fire. That would be a way to establish the relationship. But now let's go look at this sample problem, and you have grass or farmer is to cow. Well, using the sentence that we've already created, wood feeds a fire, if we tried to plug in over here, we might say grass feeds a cow, or we might say farmer feeds a cow. And so both of those would actually fit the same sentence. So we have to dig a little deeper. And so what you want to do is fine-tune your sentence. So at first we had wood feeds a fire. Let's add to that, be more descriptive. In what way does wood feed a fire? Wood feeds a fire and is consumed by the fire. So over here we could say grass feeds the fire and grass feeds the cow and is consumed by the cow. That would be correct. Farmer feeds the cow and is consumed by the cow. That might lead to some mad cow disease, but that's not typically how it works. And so as you can see, you start with a sentence that connects the two words, creates the relationship. You fine-tune your sentence to dial it in and make it more exact, where it excludes the other answer choice and narrows it in on the one that's going to be correct, in this case, which would be grass.
Fragments and run-on sentences. A fragment is an incomplete sentence or thought that cannot stand on its own. And it can't stand on its own and is incomplete because it's missing either a noun or a verb. So let's look at some examples of fragments. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard. Now this is a lot of information. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard. But you have your noun, some adjectives to describe it, an article adjective, and then you've got a prepositional phrase that tells you where they are. But you're missing something. You're missing the verb. So this one is a fragment. So you can have a longer sentence or a longer fragment that looks like a sentence and still have it be a fragment because it's missing either the noun or the verb. So we had our noun, but we were missing our verb. So even though it looks long and looks like it could be a sentence, don't be fooled by the length of a fragment, because just because a phrase is long doesn't mean it's a complete sentence. Let's look at another example. Waited all day at my house for you. In this sentence, we have an action, waiting, so we've got our verb. All day at my house for you. Well, you see some pronouns in there, but there's no noun. There's no subject of this sentence, so you're missing a subject noun in this one. So it's still a fragment. You've got the verb part, you've got the predicate part of your sentence, but you don't have the subject part. So this is a fragment. It is not a complete sentence. So when you're looking for fragments, look for either a missing verb or missing noun, because if you're missing one of those, then your fragment cannot stand on its own and will not be a complete sentence. In your writing, you'll need to revise these, and often you can just add a little bit to a fragment to make it a complete sentence. The beautiful blooming daisies in my yard look so nice this time of year. Smell wonderful. Are going to win the contest. You can finish the sentence in any way. Waited all day at my house for you. You could say, we waited all day at my house for you. I waited. My mom and I waited. It's a little bit more limited what you could put at the beginning of this sentence because we've got my and you for pronouns down here. But you still have options, and you could easily turn this fragment into a complete sentence. Now let's look at run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is a sentence that should be written as two sentences. It's too long. It contains too much information and is confusing to the reader. And if it's running on and on and on, then it's likely there's not correct punctuation and there's too many nouns and too many verbs crammed into one sentence. So you need to break it up so that you've got separate complete thoughts and it's easier for the reader to understand. Let's look at these examples of run-on sentences and then correct them. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. This is a lot of information, so we need to see where one thought ends and another one starts so that we can split it up. I couldn't believe it. Well, we want to know what she couldn't believe. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. So all that is one thought. So we're going to separate this and put a period, and we would need to capitalize the next letter, but since it was I, it was automatically capitalized. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. Now we have two complete sentences. They're separate, it's not too much information in each sentence, and it's not going to be confusing to the reader. I couldn't believe it when I heard that there were going to be thunderstorms tomorrow. I was planning on having a barbecue outside to celebrate summer. So now, it's not so confusing. It doesn't just run on and on and on. We didn't have so many subjects and so many verbs in one sentence. Now we've separated it out and made it easier for the reader to understand right away. Let's look at our next example. John and Mary had so much fun they went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. Now this one, we need to find where we need to split it up. We have another run-on sentence. We've got a lot of actions, but we need to see where we could split it up to keep the subject and verb of one sentence and the subject and verb of a second sentence and make it two complete sentences. We don't want to split it up incorrectly and leave a fragment somewhere. John and Mary. Let's look at what they did. John and Mary had so much fun, they. When we get to they, that's a new pronoun. That's a new subject. So we should stop there. John and Mary had so much fun. And then, if we're starting a new sentence, we need to capitalize our T in they. John and Mary had so much fun. They went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. So now, we have two complete thoughts. First, we're saying they had fun, and then we're saying how they had fun. And we didn't keep it a run-on sentence to where we had this pronoun in the middle of this sentence, making it sound a little confusing. We have John and Mary having fun, and then they went to the fair and rode rides and ate cotton candy. So we split it up into two sentences that are easier to understand. And you also would want to revise any run-on sentences in your writing. If you see a sentence that's going on and on for 3 or 4 lines, you probably need to find somewhere in there to break it up so that it isn't a run-on sentence. You can have sentences that are more complex if you're using semicolons, etc., but you don't want it to be so long that there are too many ideas in one sentence. So when you're writing, make sure you don't have any incomplete thoughts that are missing a noun or verb. We don't want any fragments in your writing, and make sure that none of your sentences are going on so long and including too much information that it makes it a run-on sentence.
A suffix is a part of a word that is added onto the end of a root word and cannot stand alone. So many times in a word, you have a prefix, a root, and a suffix. And so the prefix, the root word, and the suffix all combine to make one word. Now sometimes you only have a root word, sometimes you just have a prefix and a root word, and sometimes you just have a root word and a suffix, and sometimes you really just have a prefix and a suffix. But you're never just going to find a prefix, and you're never just going to find a suffix. It has to be paired with something else. Now a suffix has a meaning of its own, and so it changes or enhances the meaning of the root word that is added to it, and so it forms a new word with a little bit of a different meaning. So we have the word happy. Now we also have a suffix, which is ness. Now this line right here means that it's a suffix. If the line was after the word, it would mean that it's a prefix. But right here, this means it's a suffix, meaning the root word comes before it. So now if we combine happy and ness, we get the word happiness. And so we know what the root word means. We know what it means to be happy or joyful. But ness right here means the state of. So the suffix right here changes the meaning of happy to mean the state of being happy. So you can say that person is experiencing happiness. You wouldn't say they're experiencing happy, but you would say they're experiencing happiness. Now, think about the word geometry. You may not even be familiar with this word, but you're probably familiar with some of the parts of it. So we have geo, which is the prefix right here, and so that means earth. So I'm just going to write that right here. Geo means earth. And then we have this right here, metri, which means the measure of. It's kind of similar to the word meter. And then we have the suffix ic, which means having to do with. So we can come up with a definition here that means having to do with measuring the earth, because we have these definitions of the parts of the word, so we combine it into one approximate definition. Now, if you were to look up this word in the dictionary, you would find that the dictionary definition is of or relating to the branch of mathematics that has to do with measuring points, lines, and angles. So by using the definitions of each section of the word, we weren't necessarily able to define exactly the definition of this, but we were able to get a general idea. Now, think about the word ophthalmology. So with this word right here, we have this first part of it, which comes from the word ophthalmos, which means eye. And then we have the suffix right here, which is ology, which you've probably heard of a lot. Zoology, ecology, geology. And ology means the study of. So again, we can come up with an approximate definition. So this must mean the study of the eye. And so an ophthalmologist is someone who studies the eye. And so it's a doctor who deals with eye problems and does eye surgeries. So if you just looked at ophthalmology and thought that's the study of the eye, you're not getting an exact definition what ophthalmology is, but you're getting an idea that it's the study of the eye and the problems with it. And so there's definitely going to be a more specific definition of it, but you're able to get a general idea of what it's talking about. Now, a couple of the suffixes we looked at here were ness, ic, and ology. And there are many more suffixes. And so if you're able to learn the meaning of some of the suffixes, then you can oftentimes just look at a word and figure out what it means. Another thing you can do, say, for example, like I said earlier, say you saw the word zoology. And so you don't necessarily know what this means. Say you don't know that ology means the study of. But you have heard of the word geology, and you know that means the study of the earth or of rocks. And so you can look at this right here and think, okay, ology must mean the study of, and I've heard of the word zoo, that's a place with a lot of animals, so zoology must mean the study of animals. So think about words that are like this word, think about words that have the same suffix, and think about the definitions of that word, and then that way you can figure out the definition of the word in question. So again, a suffix is a part of a word that is added onto the end of a root word and cannot stand alone. ACT, English sentence structure. The sentence is the basic unit of communication in English. An English sentence has two parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject identifies the topic of the sentence, and the predicate comments on that topic. The subject must be a noun or a phrase or clause acting as a noun, and the predicate must include a verb. So we have an example here. Fred and his wife like to cook. So the subject here is Fred and his wife. Here we have Fred and wife, which are both nouns. And so that's the topic of the sentence. The topic of the sentence here is Fred and his wife, because they are the ones that are going to be doing the action. Now, the predicate here is like to cook. And the predicate must include a verb. And so the verb here is like. And then the predicate comments on the topic of the sentence. So here the topic is Fred and his wife, and the predicate is commenting, saying that Fred and his wife like to cook. Now, the purpose of a sentence refers to its function. Does the sentence state a fact or an opinion? Does it ask a question? Does it give a command? Or does it show excitement? And so the first type of sentence is declarative, and it makes a statement and ends with a period. Animals have their own language. That's a declarative sentence. And then an interrogative sentence asks a question and ends with a question mark, like, do animals have their own language? An imperative sentence gives a command or makes a request, and it ends with a period or an exclamation point. Like here we have carry that box. Now you may be thinking that this sentence does not have a noun in it acting as the subject. Well, many times in imperative sentences, there is an understood you as the subject. So we actually could write this sentence as you carry that box. But we can leave you out and just write carry that box, and we know that the subject is actually you. And then there's exclamatory sentences, like how beautiful she is. So an exclamatory sentence shows sudden or strong feeling, and it ends with an exclamation point. So again, the four types of sentences are declarative, interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory. ACT, Science, Research Summaries. When conducting scientific experiments, observations are made through our senses. So if you're conducting a scientific experiment, you notice or observe what's going on through your senses. Now, this is usually going to be with your sense of sight, but depending on the experiment, you may be able to incorporate your other senses. So that's what it means to observe during a scientific experiment. It means to notice what's going on through your senses. But more specifically, we can define observation as the act of noting and recording something. So this has to do with both the act of noting what's going on and then recording what happened. Because it's important for a scientist to record what goes on during the experiment, so the experiment doesn't have to be conducted over and over and over again. And so to use this definition of observation, we could say the scientist is observing what's going on in the experiment. So the scientist is noticing what's going on through his or her senses, and then the scientist is recording what happened. Now, the second definition of observation is the result or record of such notation. So we don't use this definition of observation while the experiment is taking place. We would use this definition of observation as in, let's take a look at the observations the scientists made. So this is what happens after the experiment is finished and people go back and look at the observations made by the scientist. So this is more of a noun. The observations were made by the scientist. So again, one definition is the act of noting and recording something, and then the second definition is the result or record of such notation. ACT, English sentence structure. The sentence is the basic unit of communication in English. Parts of speech identify the words which make up a sentence. So some examples of parts of speech are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, articles, interjections, prepositions, and conjunctions. So one group of words that we have is nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and pronouns. Those words perform essential functions within a sentence. In addition to performing essential functions, they also provide content. So they give the sentence its content, which makes sense because you have the nouns and pronouns, which act as subjects, and then you have your verbs, which obviously act as verbs in the sentence. In every sentence, you need a subject and a verb, which gives you the topic of the sentence, and then the verb tells more about that topic. And so you can understand how these parts of speech right here perform essential functions and provide content. And then we also have another group of words, or another group of parts of speech called the prepositions and conjunctions. And so those words connect sentences, and they connect one part to another. And when I talk about one part, I'm talking about one part of a sentence. So these prepositions and conjunctions can connect sentences to each other, and then within a sentence, they can connect one part, either one idea or one action, to another idea or action. Now, some words function only as one part of speech. However, many words can function as two or more parts of speech. Just depending on the context of the sentence, a word will be either one part of speech or another part of speech. And so that's a look at the different parts of speech in a sentence.
In this video, we want to go over prefixes. Prefixes are short little sections of words that come before the root of a word and help you understand what the word means. They add an extra nuance to the word. And why prefixes and suffixes, for that matter, are important, prefixes coming before the root of the word, suffixes, short little endings after the word, is that if you know your basic prefixes and suffixes, they help you determine the meaning of a word. And they're important clues, especially if you're taking a standardized test where they say we want you to find the word with the opposite meaning. Sometimes just knowing the prefix can give you enough of a clue, even if you don't know what the root means, to find the opposite. We've got a few examples on the board and we want to go through those briefly just to show you the importance of prefixes, how they can help you in your test-taking strategies, and how they can help you understand the meanings of words. So prefixes give clues as to a word's meaning. Knowing them can help you find the word with the opposite meaning on a test. So words like prefixes like pre. Here we think pre-operative, pre-op. That means before the operation. Or prescient. Pre meaning before, and scient from the word science, which means knowledge. So to know ahead of time. So prescient is to know ahead of time. Pre-game show, the part that comes before the game. So pre means before. The opposite of pre is post. Post-operative care, the care that happens after the operation. Post-game show, the show that happens after the game. So pre is before, post is after. If you realize this opposites, then if you see a word that's got a pre prefix on it, then you look for a word with a post prefix on it if the test is asking you to find the opposite. Another thing would be pro and d. So pro means for, as in pro-life. Someone who is pro-life is for life. De is the negation, so deconstruction. To deconstruct is the opposite of, or the negation of construction. Construction to build up, deconstruct to destroy. So pro meaning for, de is usually a negation, pre before, post after. Knowing your prefixes can be critical, especially if you're not sure of the whole word. You can say, well, let me break this word up into its prefix, its root, and its suffix, and see if I can't decode just from that minimal information the proper answer on the other side. Now, obviously, when you're taking a test, if you know the right answer, you always go with the right answer. But if you're struggling, if you're not sure, this is a strategy you can use. You can look at the word, break it down, and say, here's the prefix, and I know it means this, and I'm being asked to find the opposite. what's the opposite of this prefix, then I've got my answer more than likely. Caution though, caution. Con and pro are opposites, but congress is not the opposite of progress, although some people might disagree. That's more of a joke in terms of Congress being the opposite of progress, but con and pro are opposites, but you have to know and be careful sometimes. Anyway, that's been just a basic introduction and overview of the importance of prefixes as a test-taking strategy of knowing what they mean to help you determine the meaning of a word, and also to assist you if you're being asked to look for the opposite. If you know what the prefix means and you know what the opposite of that prefix is, it makes it a snap to find the right answer. If you'd like to learn more about this or related matters, underneath this video you'll see a link. If you'll click on that link, it'll take you to the website that has that information. While you're on that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.
ACT, English sentence structure. A sentence can be identified according to its structure. So the 4 different types of structures are simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and compound complex sentence. So a simple sentence is made up of just an independent clause. An independent clause is a clause that can stand by itself. So here's an example. It rained yesterday. So we have a subject here, it, and a verb, rained. And so this sentence isn't dependent on anything else to be a complete sentence. It's a sentence in its own right because it can stand alone. It rained yesterday is a grammatically correct sentence. So we call that an independent clause. Now, a compound sentence is made up of 2 or more independent clauses. Now, I'm just going to write here IC for independent clause. And so an example of a compound sentence is she likes to eat fruit and I like to eat vegetables. So notice here that we have a subject and a verb. She likes to eat fruit, and a subject and a verb. I like to eat vegetables. So this is an independent sentence because it could be a sentence by itself, and this is an independent sentence because we could just say I like to eat vegetables, and that's a sentence by itself. But notice here we have them joined together by a comma and the conjunction and. And so there's a few ways you can join 2 independent clauses together. One is by that example right there, by a comma and a conjunction. And so and is a conjunction, as well as words like for, but, so, and yet. And then we can also join 2 independent clauses by just a semicolon. So right here we could take out the comma and just put a semicolon. It's less common, but it's still grammatically correct. And another way is just to put a conjunction with no comma. Now that wouldn't really be grammatically correct in this sentence right here, but I'm going to show you a sentence in a little bit where this would be appropriate. You only need to do that when you have 2 short independent clauses being joined together. Now the third sentence structure is a complex sentence. It has 1 independent clause and at least 1 dependent clause. So I'm going to write here independent clause and at least 1 dependent clause. So an example of that is, because I like to drink milk, my bones are very strong. Now here you see the subject I and the verb like. So you have I like to drink milk. You have a subject and a verb, but this is not a complete sentence. This is a dependent clause because of this word right here, because. If you were to say, because I like to drink milk, that wouldn't be a complete sentence. You need something else to it to finish it out. So that's why we call this a dependent clause, because it's dependent on another clause to be complete. Now here, on the other side of this comma, we have an independent clause. Here we have a subject, bones, and a verb, are. So my bones are very strong, can stand alone. So it's joined together with this dependent clause with a comma. Now, dependent clauses can also come after the independent clause, and you could have more than 1 dependent clause in a complex sentence. Now, a dependent clause is usually introduced by a relative pronoun, such as who, which, that, or something else like that. Or a subordinating conjunction, maybe like although, because, or when. Now finally, we get to the 4th sentence structure, which is a compound complex sentence, which is 2 or more independent clauses plus 1 or more dependent clauses. So we have two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. And so an example of that is the plane arrived and we took off because we were already late. So right here we have plane as the subject and arrived as the verb. And then here we have we as the subject and took as the verb. So this is an independent clause right here because it can stand alone. And this is an independent clause. Now right here we have a dependent clause. Now again, we have a subject and we have a verb. We and were are the subject and verb here, but this is not an independent clause. If we were to take the word because off, it would be an independent clause. We were already late. But because of the word because, it's now a dependent clause. Now right here you may be thinking, we have two independent clauses here joined by just a conjunction and no comma, because what you're used to seeing is a comma right here, which that is appropriate. We could also just put a semicolon right here. That would also be appropriate to join the two independent clauses. But we can actually not use a semicolon and we can not use a comma and just have a conjunction, because this is one of the cases where, like I was saying earlier, you just need a conjunction because you have two short independent clauses. So again, the four sentence structure types are the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and the compound complex sentence.
When taking your test, you may come across questions that ask you to find synonyms. Synonyms are words that have similar meaning. They don't always have the exact same meaning because there are nuances or little differences between words that may have overlap in their meanings. And so as you're looking at the word and you're looking at the options below, one of the test-taking strategies that you may find helpful is to go through the choices that you have and immediately eliminate those that you know cannot be the possible answer. And that narrows the scope down until you get closer to the actual meaning. Now obviously, if you know the answer, you always go with what you know, but if you're uncertain as to what the correct answer is, then this little strategy can be helpful. You're not looking for a perfect synonym, you're looking for something that is a close synonym, something that has a similar meaning, an overlap in meaning, even if there's some slight nuances or little differences between the words. And so I've got an example on the board. We're going to go over this just to try to illustrate this briefly. And hopefully this will help you understand the test-taking strategy of looking for the close or nearly perfect synonym if there's not one that's an exact match. So we have the word coward, and we're looking for a word with similar meaning to coward. And here are our choices then below. First one, gutless. Second one, bore. Third one, judge. And the fourth one, brave. Now, as you're looking at the word coward and you're looking at the choices, we can automatically eliminate one because it's not a synonym, it's an antonym. It's something with the exact opposite meaning. So, brave can be ruled out automatically. We know someone who is a coward is not brave. So you've got three choices left now. You think of the word coward. Pretty sure it's not the word judge. So we were absolutely certain on this one, and we're pretty sure on C. Now we're left with two answers. We've already narrowed the field. We've got a 50% chance if we just had to outright guess. But as we're thinking about the word coward, we think, well, you know, the word gutless comes pretty close to coward. It's not a perfect match, but it's closer than bore. And maybe we don't even know what a bore is. You know, someone, oh, you're such a bore. And we're not sure what that word is, but we know that gutless has some overlap and it's close. And so if we're having to guess, once again, we're not certain of the answer. I'm assuming for the case of our example here that we don't automatically know that A is the answer. But we've been able to narrow it down by eliminating the choices that we know are not correct. And when we're left with two, we've been able to narrow it further by saying, I know there's enough overlap between coward and gutless that we're going to go with A. Now, once again, this is just an example to illustrate a test-taking strategy. When you're taking your test and you come to the portion that has synonyms, if you automatically know the right answer, go with the right answer. But if you're uncertain, then basically just start looking at the answers and eliminate the ones that you know it cannot possibly be until you've narrowed it down to the ones that are possibilities, and then start looking for overlap in meaning. Because often on these tests, they're not testing your ability to find a perfect synonym. They want you to be able to realize the relationship between words and the nuances between words, the little differences, so that you can say this is close to that meaning. This is the one that has at least some overlap, even though it's not a perfect match. So we're looking for nearly perfect synonyms, not the perfect synonym when we take these tests. That's part of what the testers are trying to gauge. Do you understand the subtle differences between words, not just the one that's a perfect match as in a definition? Anyway, I hope this has been helpful for you as you take your test to think through synonyms and looking for the one that's closest or has some overlap in meaning, not the perfect match, but a close match, and the strategy of eliminating answers that you know cannot possibly be the right one. If you'd like to learn more about this and other related matters, beneath this video you'll find a link. If you'll click on it, it'll take you to a website with that information. And while you're at that website, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download. Today I want to talk about a trap that can happen when you're taking your test. In part of your exam, you may have to do analogies. This is to this as that is to that. And you're trying to find the relationship between words and then find the one word that best shares that same relationship, analogies. And part of the problem is if you're doing this and you're going through the test, you suddenly get to a question where you don't recognize some of the words. And the temptation, the trap that we're going to talk about, is to assume that the one word you do recognize has to be the right answer because it's the one word you recognize. We want to avoid that problem. So I'm going to put an example. I've got an example here on the board behind me that we want to go over briefly. Now, it's a pretty simple example. You probably already know what all the words mean, but just for sake of illustration, let's assume you've got this question. Blank is to speech as coordinated is to movement. And as you look through the answers, let's say that the one answer that you recognize immediately is B, rapid. Well, I know what rapid is. I'm not too sure about the rest of these words. What's prophetic? I don't understand that. So I'll go with the one that I recognize. Surely the one word that I see there that I recognize immediately, that has to be the right one. This is the trap of familiarity. Sometimes the test takers will put a word, a short, simple, familiar word in the midst of other words that are less familiar and try to get the person to say, well, if they really don't know what it is, they'll probably just pick the word that they know out of the list. And so in this case, rapid is there because people understand that there is such a thing as rapid speech, just as there is quick walking or rapid movement. And it's there as a way to sort of trick the person, trap the person. Maybe they don't know what these other words mean. They'll recognize this one and they'll just go with that. And you want to slow down at this point. If you're not sure about words, slow down, take a closer look, and then start eliminating things that you can immediately eliminate. So part of the strategy then is to avoid the trap of familiarity. If you're uncertain, you don't just go immediately to the one word that you do know and assume that's the right word. Now, in this case, if we start looking at the analogy that we're given completely, coordinated and movement. So we know there's something to do with movement, and coordination as it relates to movement is going to be similar to whatever that would be in speech. And we've already said that rapid would be the default one if you didn't know what the other words meant, because it's the simplest word there. Predictive and prophetic are actually going to be very similar in meaning, and let's say you knew that. Well, how am I going to choose between those two? If predictive and prophetic are similar, perhaps we will rule them out because they're too close in meaning. It's too hard to get it. And so by process of elimination, you've ended up with D, articulate. Now, hopefully at this juncture as well, and this is always true for any test, if you know what the right answer is, you immediately go with the right answer. We're just talking about if you get yourself in a situation where you're not sure what the correct answer is. And at that point, you need to slow down and remember not only the test-taking strategies that can be helpful, but also some of the pitfalls in standardized tests. And that one, of course, is this trap of familiarity. But as you know, D is the correct answer here. That articulate speech is the same thing as coordinated movement. The analogies are similar or the same. So anyway, remember this particular trap. If you're looking at a question, you're not sure of some of the words, don't just automatically gravitate to the one word you do know, thinking, well, that must be the correct answer. Often, it's a trap. If you'd like to learn more about this and related matters, there's a link underneath this video. You can click on it. It'll take you to that website with that information. And while you're there, you'll also find a link to an ebook that's ready for immediate download.